He took everything from me, my ancestral home, my dignity, and 7 years of my life. He thought he sold my past to a stranger for $480,000 in cash. He didn't realize that in life, some debts can only be paid by losing everything, and that stranger was me. My name is Eliza Vance. On paper, I was 35 years old and had everything. I was a senior brand manager at Stratus Media Group, one of those sleek, glass-walled digital consulting firms in Chicago that promises to revolutionize your online footprint. My days were a blur of client meetings, soy lattes, and key performance indicators. The life Mark and I had built was showcased in our penthouse apartment, a sterile expanse of white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. It was the kind of place featured in architectural magazines, beautiful to look at but cold to the touch. We had the requisite social circle, a collection of equally polished couples who discussed stock portfolios and ski trips to Aspen, and at the center of it all was Mark, my husband, Mark Vance. Mark was a successful financial consultant, the epitome of charm and stability. To everyone else, he was charisma personified. When he walked into a room, the energy tilted in his direction. He had a smile that could disarm a firing squad and a laugh that made you feel like you were in on the joke, even if you were not. He was generous to a fault, always picking up the check, always offering a supportive hand on my shoulder when I talked about a difficult day at work. "Whatever you need, Eliza," he would say, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You just focus on being brilliant. I'll handle the boring stuff." He was the supportive husband, the rock. Everyone loved him. Everyone, that is, except my grandfather. The call came on a Tuesday. My grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, had passed away in his sleep. I had not seen him in nearly 5 years. Arthur was the black sheep of the Pendleton family, an eccentric recluse who lived in a decaying house in suburban New York, tinkering with investments and openly despising the modern world. He was also the only person who had ever looked Mark directly in the eye and seemed utterly unimpressed. At our wedding 7 years ago, he had cornered me by the champagne fountain, his eyes sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. "That man's smile doesn't reach his eyes, Eliza," he had grumbled. "He's hollow." I had brushed it off as the ramblings of an old man who trusted no one. His death left me with an unexpected inheritance, the entirety of his estate, which consisted of a single asset, Willow Creek Manor. The name alone brought back dusty memories of cobwebs and overgrown lawns from a single childhood visit. It was not a prized property, it was a ruin, a rotting monument to a past I had tried to forget. Mark, ever the pragmatic one, immediately took charge. "A house like that, Eliza, it's not a gift, it's a legal liability," he said, rubbing my back in that performatively soothing way of his. "The property taxes alone will be astronomical. This is a mess. Don't you worry your head about it. I'll handle everything." I let him. I trusted his business acumen implicitly. It was Mark, after all, who had convinced me to sign that post-nuptial agreement about 3 years into our marriage. I had just gotten a significant promotion, and he had presented it as a shield. "My business involves risk, darling," he had explained over a $200 bottle of Cabernet, the city lights twinkling below us. "This agreement just gives me the authority to manage our joint assets, to move things around if my ventures go south. It's purely to protect you, to insulate your successes from any of my professional debts." It sounded so logical, so protective. I signed it without reading the fine print. Why would I? He was my husband. A wave of guilt washed over me as Mark started making calls to probate lawyers. I had neglected Arthur. I had chosen the sleek, modern life in Chicago over the complicated, dusty past he represented. I had let Mark convince me that my grandfather was just a bitter old eccentric. The least I could do now was let my capable husband handle the burden Arthur had left behind. I retreated into my work at Stratos, letting the details of the will become background noise. But the noise started getting louder. The cracks in our perfect marble facade began to show, faint hairlines at first, the kind you only see if you are looking closely. Mark started taking his phone calls on the balcony, even as the Chicago wind whipped at his expensive suit. I would catch snippets of conversations, his voice lowered to a strained whisper, a name repeated over and over: Simon Croft. Simon just needs to push the paperwork. I heard him hiss into the phone one night, his back to me. Simon Croft. Your lawyer. I asked later as we were getting ready for bed. Mark flinched, an almost imperceptible tightening in his shoulders. He turned, the charming smile snapping back into place, but it looked brittle. Just boring estate stuff. Eliza, paperwork. You know how lawyers are. He's handling the probate for Willow Creek. But his irritation grew. A few days later, I asked a simple question about our joint savings account, wondering if we needed to budget for the funeral expenses. I told you I am handling it, he snapped. The sharpness in his tone made me recoil. He had never used that voice with me. He immediately softened, pulling me into an embrace, his chin resting on my head. I'm sorry, baby. I'm just stressed. This whole thing with your grandfather's estate is more complicated than I thought. It's a logistical nightmare. I'm just trying to protect you from it. I leaned against him, smelling the faint scent of expensive cologne and something else, something sharp and acidic I could not place. I mistook it for stress. I mistook his secrecy for protection. I realize now that I was not just his wife. I was his last, best asset. And he was already preparing the liquidation. The day the world ended was a Tuesday. It started like any other Tuesday. I grabbed a coffee from the lobby, swiped my security badge at the elevator, and was finalizing my slide deck for the afternoon pitch by 9:15 a.m. The air in the office was normal, filled with the quiet typing and the scent of burnt coffee from the break room. At 10:30, an email popped up from my boss, David's assistant. Brief catch-up in conference room B. I grabbed my notebook, assuming it was about the pitch. When I walked in, David was there, along with a woman from Human Resources I barely recognized. The blinds were drawn. David, a man I had shared countless friendly lunches with, was staring intently at a spot on the mahogany table. He would not look at me. Eliza, the HR woman began, her voice flat and professional. As you know, the market has shifted. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. I did not know. Stratos Media Group is undergoing a significant corporate restructuring, effective immediately. As part of this realignment, your position as senior brand manager has been eliminated. It was sterile, surgical. There was no emotion, just terminology. Restructuring, eliminated. I looked at David. He was my friend. He and his wife had been to our home for dinner just last month. David, I said, my voice sounding small. He finally looked up, his eyes glassy and cold. This is a difficult day for all of us, Eliza. The decision is final. HR will escort you back to your desk to gather your personal belongings. Your network access has been terminated. He knew. He had known this was coming. I found out later, much later, that David's regular Saturday golf partner was none other than Simon Croft. The execution was clean, no witnesses, no sentiment. I was a line item that had been deleted. I was outside on the pavement by 11 a.m., holding a cardboard box filled with a cheap desk plant and a few framed photos. The city noise was deafening. I tried to call Mark. His phone went straight to voicemail. Mark, something terrible happened, I said, my voice trembling. They fired me. David, please call me back. I'm coming home. The cab ride to the penthouse was a blur of adrenaline and confusion. How could this happen? I was a top performer, restructuring. It made no sense. I rushed into our building's lobby, ignoring the doorman's sympathetic nod, and went straight to the private elevator for the penthouse. I jabbed my keycard into the slot. Red light. Access denied. I swiped it again. Red light. That's strange, I muttered, frustration rising over the panic. I swiped it fast, hard. Red, red, red. Ma'am, Mrs. Vance. I turned. The head doorman, Frank, was looking at me with deep, uncomfortable pity. That was when I saw him. Mark was sitting in one of the lobby's stiff designer armchairs. He was not looking at his phone. He was just waiting. Beside his feet was a small, black, rolling suitcase, my overnight bag. He stood up. The man who stood was not my husband. The famous, disarming smile was gone, scrubbed clean. His face was a cold, flat mask of indifference. He looked at me as if I were a stranger he had bumped into on the street. An annoyance. Mark, what's going on? My key won't work. David fired me. I think Simon. Stop talking, Eliza, he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the lobby's sterile quiet. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. I've filed for divorce. The cardboard box slipped from my hands. My desk plant shattered on the marble floor, spilling soil and ceramic shards. I did not even look down. What? No. Mark, you're not making sense. I just lost my job. I know you lost your job, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was necessary. Necessary? What are you talking about? I'm in trouble, Eliza, deep trouble, and I'm not letting you drag me down any further. He explained it calmly, as if discussing a quarterly report. He was in debt. Not just a little credit card trouble, but massive, life-destroying debt. Risky investments had gone bad. The gambling, which I thought was just a few friendly poker games, was a full-blown addiction. He owed very dangerous people a great deal of money. But our money, our savings. I stammered. Gone, he said. All of it. I've been covering my margins for months. The apartment. Mark, we'll lose the apartment. He almost smiled. It was a terrifying, humorless twitch of his lips. We already have. I sold it 2 weeks ago. The new owners take possession tomorrow. Sold it? How could you sell it without me? And then, the final knife. The post-nup, Eliza. The one I had you sign to protect you. It gave me full managerial rights over our joint assets in the event of financial hardship. And I am in hardship. But this is our home. That's a joint asset. It was, he corrected. But the debt is bigger than the apartment. I needed more liquidity. I'm afraid I had to liquidate the only other asset you brought to the table. My blood ran cold. What? What other asset? Willow Creek Manor, he said, saying the name as if it were trash. Your grandfather's rotting pile of bricks. It's a liability, but I found a buyer. A quick cash sale. It's just enough to clear my immediate debts and give me a fresh start. He had sold my family home. The house Arthur left me. The mess he was handling for me. He had classified it, under the terms of the post-nup, as an asset he could liquidate to cover the debts he had run up. My accounts, I whispered. The full 6-hour catastrophe landing on me. The job, the house, the inheritance, my bank account. Frozen, he said. All joint accounts are. Your personal credit cards, which were tied to the joint account, will be declined by morning. I needed to make sure you couldn't try to fight this. In the span of a single workday, from 9:15 a.m. to 3 p.m., I had lost my job, my home, my marriage, and my inheritance. I was standing in a lobby with a shattered plant at my feet, holding nothing but my purse. Mark picked up the small suitcase and rolled it toward me. It wobbled on the marble. I packed a few things for you, enough for a few days. He reached into his jacket pocket, the pocket of a suit I had bought him for our anniversary. He pulled out a wad of cash. Here, he said, thrusting it at me. It's about $2,000, enough to get you started. A hotel for a week or two. I stared at the money, unable to move. Take it, Eliza. His voice hardened. Take it, and walk away. You have nothing. I have the best lawyers. Simon Croft is a shark. If you try to contest the post-nup, if you try to fight me on the sale of the house, I will bury you. I will drag this out until you are not only penniless, but you owe my lawyers money. Do you understand me? He did not wait for an answer. He saw the broken terror in my eyes. That was answer enough. He pushed the money into my hand, my fingers instinctively closing around it. "Goodbye, Eliza," he said. He turned, walked out the revolving glass doors, and hailed a cab, leaving me standing in the wreckage of the life he had surgically amputated. I left the city. I took a bus to the anonymous sprawl of the suburbs, where the highways met strip malls and transient motels. I found one called the Starlight Inn, a name far too romantic for a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial bleach. I paid for 1 week, in cash, from the $2,000 Mark had pressed into my hand. The bills felt dirty. The room was a beige box with a brown shag carpet, a flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom, and a bedspread with a floral pattern so faded it was almost gray. I sat on the edge of the bed for an hour, the small, wheeled suitcase Mark had packed for me standing by the door like an accusation. The first 2 days were a blur of shock. I operated on a numb autopilot. I used the motel's patchy Wi-Fi to try and call my friends. I left frantic voicemails for Sarah, for Chloe, for the people I had hosted at brunches and cocktail parties, the people who had called Mark the perfect husband. The responses, when they came, were cold and brief. Sarah texted, "Eliza, I'm so sorry, but this is between you and Mark. We can't get involved." Chloe, my closest friend from Stratus, the one I had mentored, sent a single line. "I have to think about my own job. I can't be seen talking to you. I'm sorry." The rest, silence. I had been naive. They were not my friends. They were Mark's audience, and my part in the play had been canceled. I was a social leper. By the 4th day, the shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged panic. The $2,000 would not last. I was a highly skilled brand manager with 15 years of experience. I could get another job. I spent all of a day and all of a night on employment websites, tailoring my resume, writing cover letters, and sending applications into the digital void. I applied for everything, from senior positions to entry-level coordinating roles. Nothing. Not one email. Not one automated reply. I tried calling a few old colleagues directly, people I had trusted. One hung up on me. Another spoke in a strained, formal voice, saying, "I don't think I'm in a position to give you a reference at this time. Eliza." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not just bad luck. This was Simon Croft. Mark had not just taken my money, he had taken my professional life, my reputation. He had not just buried me in legal fees, he had buried me, period. He had salted the earth. I was unemployable. Despair is not a sudden storm. It is a slow, creeping damp that gets into your bones. I spent the 6th day in that room, never turning on the light. I just lay on the scratchy bedspread, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the sounds of the highway outside bleeding through the thin walls. This was it. This was the bottom. Mark had won. He had erased me. I was a 35-year-old woman in a motel room with a few $100s to my name and no future. I was worthless, invisible, exactly as he had intended. The ambitious, brilliant Eliza Vance was gone, and this shell was all that remained. And then, a memory pierced the fog, a cold, clear memory from last Christmas. My grandfather, Arthur, sitting in his cluttered study at Willow Creek, the last time I had visited before Mark convinced me it was too depressing to go back. Arthur had pressed a heavy, old-fashioned document box into my hands. It was metal, painted black, with a sturdy lock. "This is for you, Eliza," he had said, his eyes sharp and insistent. "Not for your husband. For you." "It's lovely, Grandpa," I had said, trying to humor him. "It's not lovely," he snapped. "It's practical. Put it somewhere that hollow man of yours won't find it. And you must promise me something. Do not open it. You only open it if you lose everything else. Do you understand me? Everything." At the time, I had thought it was just more of his eccentricity, His paranoia about Mark. I understand, Grandpa. I had promised, just to appease him. Mark had seen it when I got home. What's that rusty piece of junk? He had laughed. Another treasure from the dragon's hoard. Just some old papers from Grandpa. I lied. I'll put it in storage. And I kept a small 5 by 5 foot storage unit under my maiden name, a tiny rebellion I had never even admitted to myself. It was where I kept my college albums, my mother's letters, the few things from my past that Mark had deemed clutter for our sterile penthouse. I had hidden the box there, under a pile of old blankets, and forgotten all about it, until now. When you lose everything else, I was there. The last of my cash went to a taxi and then to a grizzled, suspicious locksmith I found in a strip mall near the storage facility. He charged me $150 to come with me and pick the lock. "What's in it?" he asked, his tools working at the old mechanism. "Something valuable." "I have no idea," I whispered. The lock clicked and sprang open. The locksmith grunted, packed his tools, and left me alone in the dim, fluorescent-lit hallway of the storage building. My hands were shaking. I lifted the heavy lid. I had dreamt of finding cash, or stocks, or jewelry. The box was nearly empty. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were only 3 items. An old, pocket-sized voice recorder, the kind that used microcassettes, a single, ornate brass key, the kind used for a safe deposit box, and a single folded sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. I picked up the note. The handwriting was my grandfather's, shaky with age, but unmistakably his. It said, "Eliza, if you are reading this, the vulture has taken the bait. Do not cry. Listen." I sat on the dusty floor of the storage unit, the single bare bulb humming above me. Do not cry. Listen. I picked up the small, plastic voice recorder. It felt like a relic from another century. I found the play button, my thumb pressing down until I heard the distinct thwack and the mechanical whir of the microcassette turning. A rush of static filled the small room, and then, his voice. "Eliza." I stopped breathing. It was him. It was Arthur. His voice was thin, papery, the sound of a man in his final weeks, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "If you are hearing this," the voice crackled, "it means I was right. It means the vulture has finally moved on the nest, and it means you are exactly where I need you to be." Tears welled, hot and immediate, but his first words echoed in my head. "Do not cry. Listen." I wiped my face angrily, leaning closer to the tiny speaker. "I knew what he was the day you brought him to Willow Creek." Arthur continued. "I saw it. You saw a husband. I saw a parasite with a good haircut. I knew he would wait, and I knew he would act the moment I was gone. So, I spent the last 5 years of my life not just watching my stocks, but watching him." The tape hissed. I could hear him take a labored breath. "He's a fraud, Eliza, a cheap, desperate gambler wrapped in an expensive suit. And I knew he would come for the house. He thinks the house is the inheritance. The house is just the trap." I held the recorder so tightly my knuckles turned white. "A trap. I have left you 2 inheritances." His voice rasped. "The first is the one he knows about. Willow Creek Manor, a decaying, debt-ridden albatross. I made sure the county records reflected astronomical back taxes. I made it look like a burden, a mess he would feel smart for handling. I knew he would use that fraudulent post-nup to seize it. I counted on it." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that broke my heart. "The second inheritance is the one he will never find. A trust, established under a name you do not know, hidden behind so many firewalls that only one person can access it. A woman I trust with my life, and now, with yours. The assets in this trust. They are significant." My mind was reeling. He had investigated Mark. He had seen this coming, all of it. "The key in the box," Arthur's voice commanded, pulling me back. "It's for a safe deposit box, a small, private bank in downtown Chicago. Not one of those glass towers he does his dirty business in. An old one. The Chicago Fidelity Trust. Go there. Inside. You will find enough cash to live on. You will also find the contact information for the trustee. Her name is Genevieve Harding. The tape clicked, followed by a long stretch of static. I thought it was over. But then his voice returned, weaker but fiercely urgent. One last thing. Eliza, this is the most important part. He is going to sell the house. He has to. It is the only way his debt is satisfied in the eyes of the law. You will want to fight him. You will want to get an injunction, to scream that it is yours. You must not. Do you hear me? Do not try to stop the sale. Let him sell it. Let the vulture have his bait. Harding will know what to do. The tape clicked again, and this time, the whirring stopped. Silence. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I picked up the brass key. The Chicago Fidelity Trust was exactly as Arthur had described. It was old world, a marble lobby with dark wood paneling and tellers who spoke in hushed tones. I felt exposed, walking in with my cheap overnight bag, my wrinkled clothes, and the lingering smell of the Starlight Inn. I looked like a refugee, but the key was heavy in my hand. I was led by a silent attendant into the vault, a massive circular steel door opening to reveal a wall of gleaming metal boxes. I signed a logbook, my maiden name, Eliza Pendleton, feeling strange on my tongue. The attendant used his key, then mine. He pulled out a long, narrow metal box and handed it to me before gesturing to a private viewing booth. I locked the booth's door behind me. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure the attendant could hear it. I lifted the lid. On top was a thick manila envelope. I opened it. It was full of cash, stacks of $100 bills, bound in paper bands. I counted it quickly, my hands shaking. $20,000. 10 times what Mark had given me to get started. It was breathing room. It was survival. Beneath the envelope was another, smaller note from Arthur, wrapped around a single, crisp business card. The card read, Genevieve Harding, attorney at law, Harding and Associates, New York. I unfolded the note. It was just 3 sentences. This money is for the transition. Call Mrs. Harding. Remember what I said. Do not interfere with the sale. Let him think he has won. It is the only way. I walked out of the bank into the afternoon sun. The $2,000 from Mark was in my motel room. This $20,000 was in my purse. I was no longer a victim. I was my grandfather's granddaughter. And I had a phone call to make. I checked out of the Starlight Inn, the $20,000 a solid, comforting weight in my purse. I destroyed the cheap burner phone I had been using and bought a new, secure one at a corporate electronics store. I found a different motel, a clean, anonymous business-class suite far from the one Mark's gift had paid for. I sat in a room that did not smell of despair, took a deep breath, and dialed the New York number on Genevieve Harding's card. A woman answered on the first ring. Her voice was like ice water, clear, cold, and immediate. Harding. No, hello. No, Harding and Associates. Just the name. My name is Eliza Vance, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. My grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, left your card for me. There was a pause, not of surprise, but of calculation. Mr. Pendleton informed me this call might come. I have a series of questions for you. Your mother's maiden name. Crawford. The name of your first pet. A goldfish. Barnaby. The amount of money your grandfather gave you for your college graduation, which you were instructed to waste on something frivolous. I smiled. A real thin smile. $5,000. I bought a first edition set of Jane Austen. He would have preferred you went to Paris, the voice stated, but he was satisfied. Very well. Ms. Vance, I am Genevieve Harding. I was your grandfather's legal counsel for the last 20 years, and I am the executor of his private trust. I've been awaiting your call. Mrs. Harding, Ms. Harding, she corrected, not unkindly. Just precisely. And I suggest you find a secure location, as this conversation will be lengthy. Arthur was a meticulous man, and he left meticulous instructions. I was already there. I'm secure. He said on the recording that he left 2 inheritances. That is correct, Ms. Harding said. The first, Willow Creek Manor, was a piece of performance art. The second is the Pendleton Fund. It is a blind trust established 5 years ago, domiciled offshore, and structured so as to be invisible to any domestic probate court. Your grandfather was not just an eccentric, he was a brilliant and deeply paranoid investor. The fund currently holds assets valued at just over $32 million. I leaned against the wall, my knees weak. $32 million. Mark had destroyed my life, he thought, for a crumbling house he hoped to sell for a few $100,000. Your grandfather. Ms. Harding continued, her voice pulling me from the shock, was well aware of your husband's financial appetites. He was also a student of the law. He knew that the post-nuptial agreement Mr. Vance coerced you into signing was legally dubious. We could, in theory, fight it in court. We should, I said, anger flaring. We should fight him now. No, Harding replied, the single word stopping me cold. Your grandfather was firm on this. A legal battle would take years. It would bleed you dry emotionally. Mr. Croft is a slippery, unethical attorney, and Mark Vance is a charismatic liar. A judge might be swayed. The post-nup might be upheld. It would be a gamble. Arthur did not believe in gambles he could not control. So what was his plan? He just let Mark take it. He let him take the bait. Ms. Vance. Arthur's plan was not to fight the post-nup, but to make it irrelevant. He wanted to wash the title, the only way to legally, permanently, and completely sever Mark Vance's claim on Willow Creek Manor, a claim he gained through that fraudulent document, was to let him exercise the power of that document. He had to be allowed to sell the property. A sale to a legitimate third-party buyer extinguishes all prior claims. The house would be legally clean. Your husband's signature on a bill of sale is the very thing that will liberate the property from his grasp forever. I was beginning to understand. It was not surrender. It was a strategy of sacrifice. Let him win the battle so he would lose the war. I have been monitoring Mr. Vance and Mr. Croft since the day Arthur passed, Harding said, her voice chillingly casual. My investigators are quite thorough. They are, as we speak, in a state of mild panic. Mark's debts are more severe than he let on, and Simon Croft has his own creditors. They are not just selling the house, they are trying to sell it fast. They have it on the private market for a laughably low price, desperate for a quick cash closing. He told me he had a buyer, I whispered, remembering the coldness in his eyes. He does. Harding confirmed. They have an offer. It came from a newly formed entity, a foreign investment LLC that registered in Delaware 3 weeks ago. This LLC has offered them cash, wire transfer on closing, no inspections. To Mark and Simon, this buyer is a miracle, a fool from overseas who is willing to overpay slightly for a teardown, and fast. They are ecstatic. They believe they have found the perfect idiot. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so complex and beautiful in its cruelty that I almost laughed. So, what do we do? I asked. What's our next move? There was a dry pause on the line. I could almost hear the thin, satisfied smile in her voice. We do nothing, Ms. Vance, Ms. Harding said. We do absolutely nothing. We let the sale proceed. We let Mr. Vance sign the papers. We let him collect his money. Your grandfather arranged everything. Mark Vance felt the smooth, cold reassurance of a $90 glass of scotch in his hand. He was in a dark, paneled steakhouse in the Loop, the kind of place that existed for men who considered themselves winners. He swirled the amber liquid, the ice cubes clinking softly. Across the table, his lawyer, Simon Croft, was carefully cutting into a filet mignon. It's done, Simon said, his voice a low, satisfied hum. The wire from the Foreign Investment LLC cleared the escrow account at 11:03 a.m. As of 1 hour ago, $480,000, minus my modest commission, is sitting in your new account. Mark let out a long, slow breath he felt he had been holding for a year. And the best part, Simon, the absolute best part. Simon raised an eyebrow, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Silence, Mark said, a wide, predatory smile spreading across his face. Absolute, beautiful silence. Not one hysterical phone call. Not one threatening letter from some bargain bin lawyer. Nothing. I told you she was weak. I broke her so completely she just evaporated. The fool didn't even fight. Simon allowed himself a small, reptilian smile. I admit, I'm surprised. I had anticipated an injunction, a temporary restraining order. I had an entire file prepared to paint her as unstable, to countersue for harassment. It would have been unpleasant. Unpleasant for her, Mark corrected, taking a deep drink of his scotch. But this is better. It's clean. She just signed away her last connection to that old man and probably doesn't even know it. The number had been his obsession for weeks. $480,000. It was the perfect figure. He had calculated it down to the dollar. His gambling debts, the ones that came with threatening late-night phone calls, totaled just over $200,000. The private investors Simon had roped him into, who were essentially loan sharks in better suits, needed $150,000 to be silenced. That left Mark with a clean $130,000. It was not millions. Not yet. But it was a fresh start. It was seed money. It was his escape from the hole he had dug, paid for entirely by an asset he had convinced his wife was a liability. He pictured Eliza right then. He imagined her in some drab uniform, working a minimum wage job. Maybe a barista at a suburban Starbucks, her hands raw, her face pale and defeated. He imagined her checking her prepaid phone, seeing the zero balance in her non-existent bank account. The image filled him with a profound sense of rightness, of order restored. He was the smart one. She was the emotional one. He was the predator. She was the prey. This was simply the natural conclusion of things. The sale itself had been a masterpiece of impersonal efficiency. It was all handled remotely, a flurry of secure emails and encrypted document servers between Simon's office and the faceless legal firm representing the buyers. The buyers, this mysterious LLC, had asked for no inspections, no surveys, no contingencies. They just wanted a fast cash closing. They were, as Simon had gleefully called them, the perfect suckers. Mark had signed the final papers on a digital tablet from the comfort of his new, leased condo, the post-nup agreement attached as the authorizing document. The money was his. He did not wait. The notification from the bank hit his phone at 10:04 a.m. By noon, he was at a high-end European car dealership on the Gold Coast. He did not browse. He pointed to a graphite-gray Maserati, its lines sleek and predatory. "I'll take that one," he said. He wired the down payment from his phone. By 3 p.m., he was back in his condo, a bottle of champagne breathing in an ice bucket. He was booking 2 first-class, non-refundable tickets to St. Bart's for the following Monday. He sent a text to a 24-year-old yoga instructor named Kelly, a woman he had been seeing for 6 months. "Pack your smallest bikinis," he wrote. "We're celebrating my divorce." He felt a final string, a loose end he needed to snip. He felt the intoxicating rush of victory, and victory was pointless without an audience, even a defeated one. He picked up his phone and dialed my old number. He knew I would not answer. He hoped I would not. A voicemail was a performance. It was a monologue. As he expected. It beeped, signaling the recording. "Hey, Eliza, it's Mark." His voice was a perfect blend of casual confidence and manufactured pity. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up. Listen, I know the last few weeks have been messy, but it was really all just business. And, speaking of business, I just wanted to let you know that old rotting house of your grandfather's finally sold. Cleared. It's done." He paused, letting the silence hang, imagining her listening to this in her squalid motel room. "You'll be happy to know it. Well, it really helped me out of a tight spot. A really tight spot. So, I just wanted to say thank you. Sincerely. Thank you for settling my bills." He chuckled, a soft, intimate sound. "Good luck with your new life, Eliza. I really mean that." He ended the call, feeling a profound sense of closure. He had won. He had erased his debts and his wife in a single, brilliant move. That message traveled through the network and lit up the screen of a brand new, secured smartphone. I was not in a coffee shop. I was not in a motel. I was in a spacious, sunlit apartment on the Upper West Side of New York, a temporary residence leased and paid for by the Pendleton Fund. I was looking out the window at the green expanse of Central Park, a cup of tea growing cold in my hand. I pressed play. I listened to his voice, that practiced, charming, utterly false tone. I listened to the gloating, the condescension, the pathetic need to have the last word. I heard the triumph in his voice as he thanked me for settling his bills. A year ago, that message would have shattered me. 6 weeks ago, it would have reduced me to tears of rage and humiliation. That day, I felt nothing. It was not numbness. It was clarity. It was the cold, clean feeling of a surgeon identifying a tumor. He was so arrogant, so blinded by his own small-time victory that he could not see the cage he was building for himself. He thought he was delivering the final insult. He did not realize he was just confirming the transaction. I stood there for a long moment, watching the people in the park below, tiny and distant. Then, without saving the file, without a moment of hesitation, I deleted the voicemail. It was just noise. The sale was complete. The trap was set. It was exactly 1 week after Mark's gloating voicemail. The air in New York had been crisp and anonymous. The air out here, driving through the winding suburban roads of my childhood, was thick and heavy with memory. I had not been to Willow Creek Manor in over 5 years. Ms. Harding sat in the driver's seat of a discreet black sedan, her hands resting on the wheel at a perfect 10-2 position. She navigated the roads with a precision that suggested she had made this trip before. "He never came here, you know," I said, my voice quiet. "Mark, after that first visit, he said the place gave him allergies. He said it smelled of decay and bad decisions." "Your husband," Ms. Harding replied, her eyes fixed on the road, "has a profound lack of imagination. He sees value only in what can be liquidated by Friday. He is a scavenger, not a builder." We made the final turn onto the long, gravel driveway I vaguely remembered. The wrought iron gates, rusted and hanging partially off their hinges, had been pulled open. The driveway was choked with weeds, and as the house came into view, I felt a familiar pang of shame. It was a mess. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung at drunken angles, and the magnificent willow trees that gave the manor its name were desperately overgrown, their branches scraping the roof. But something was different. The last time I saw it, I had seen it through Mark's eyes a burden, a failure, a rotting monument to my family's eccentricities. Now, as Ms. Harding put the car in park, I saw it through my own. It was not a burden. It was an fortress. It was an anchor. It was the only thing in my life that had not been a lie. "It looks terrible," I whispered, but there was no sting in the words. "It is merely neglected, Ms. Vance," Harding said, turning off the engine. The sudden silence was vast, broken only by the sound of distant birds. "Structurally, your grandfather ensured it was sound. He poured a new foundation 6 years ago." She reached into her leather briefcase, which sat perfectly upright on the console between us. She did not pull out a file or a laptop. She pulled out a small, velvet bag. She opened it and tipped the contents into her hand, a single, shiny, new brass key, attached to a simple, heavy-duty key ring. She held it out to me. I looked at the key, then at her. "What is this?" "Your house key," she said, her expression unreadable. "Welcome home, Ms. Vance." I stared at her, the confusion absolute. "Ms. Harding, I don't understand. The sale. It went through. Mark sold it. We let him." "We did," she confirmed. "So, it belongs to that foreign LLC. I can't just walk in. This is breaking and entering." For the first time since I had met her, the corner of Genevieve Harding's mouth twitched in what I can only describe as a smile. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. "On the contrary," she said, "you are the sole owner. You cannot trespass on your own property." "But the buyer?" "Yes, the buyer," she said, finally allowing her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, sharp and clear. Mark and Simon were in such a desperate hurry. They were so thrilled to find a fool with cash that they never performed even the most basic due diligence. They never looked behind the registration number of the Delaware entity. They just saw the wire transfer. She jangled the key in her palm. "That Foreign Investment LLC, the anonymous entity that paid cash, it has a legal, registered name. It is called Pendleton Holdings." The name hung in the air. I searched my memory, feeling the click of a lock tumbling into place. "Pendleton, as in the Pendleton Fund?" "Precisely." Harding nodded. "The blind trust your grandfather established for you. The LLC is a wholly owned subsidiary of the fund." I could not speak. My hand, which I had raised to take the key, was frozen in the air. "You bought it, Eliza," Harding said, her voice dropping to a low, precise, and utterly devastating tone. "Mark just sold your inheritance. To you. And the $480,000 he is currently, and with great enthusiasm, spending on Maseratis and mistresses, that was your money." She finally placed the key in my trembling hand. It was cold and solid. "He thinks he won," I whispered, the audacity of Arthur's plan unfolding in my mind like a map. "He thinks he's a genius," Harding corrected. "He thinks he erased his debts by liquidating your only asset. What he actually did was perform an invaluable legal service. He took a property that was tied up in a complicated, contested post-nuptial agreement, and he personally, voluntarily, and legally signed it over, free and clear of all his claims, to a new, unassailable owner, you. That $480,000. That was not a profit for him. That was the price. A small price to pay. Arthur felt, to legally remove a parasite from the title of your home forever. He laundered the deed for you, and he paid for the privilege out of your own pocket." I closed my hand around the key. I looked at the dilapidated house, my house, and I did not see the peeling paint or the broken shutters. I saw the trap. I saw the genius of my grandfather. And I saw, for the first time, the shape of my own victory. I slid the new key into the old, stiff lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy thunk. The massive front door groaned open, spilling a shaft of dusty afternoon light into a grand foyer that was layered in white sheets, like a congregation of ghosts. The air was cold and still, smelling of old wood, paper, and disuse. "It's safe now," Ms. Harding said from behind me. She stepped past me into the foyer, her practical heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. "Completely and irrefutably yours. When Pendleton Holdings purchased this property, it satisfied all outstanding liens the fictional back taxes Arthur created and, more importantly, any claim Mr. Vance had through your marriage or that post-nup, the title is clean. He cannot touch it. He cannot touch you." I ran my hand along a sheet-covered table, The finality of it was a relief, but a cold one. So, he's just gone. He's in St. Bart's with our money, and that's it. He just gets away with it. Oh, no, Ms. Harding said. She looked at me, and that thin, sharp smile returned. He doesn't get away with it. You've misunderstood. Your grandfather was not a man who believed in half measures. What I've told you so far was just the defense. It was the maneuver to save your inheritance. We have not yet discussed the offense. She turned and walked down the main hall. Arthur had one final secret. He used this house for more than a trap. He used it as an archive. I followed her through the house, our footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. We entered the library. It was the heart of the house, a 2-story room paneled in dark cherry wood, lined with thousands of books. It smelled intensely of paper and leather. Unlike the rest of the house, it was not covered in sheets. It was exactly as Arthur had left it, a fortress of knowledge. Mark had hated this room. He had called it a fire hazard full of dead trees. Ms. Harding did not pause. She walked directly to a section of shelving between 2 tall windows. It looked just like the rest of the wall, a solid expanse of carved wood. Mark Vance never would have noticed this, she said. He never spent more than 5 minutes in this room. He was constitutionally incapable of looking closely at anything that did not reflect his own image. She did not tap the wall. She reached for a specific, leather-bound book on the shelf, a copy of The Art of War, and pulled it forward exactly 3 inches. There was a quiet snick, then a mechanical whir. A section of the paneled wall, about 4 feet wide, receded slightly and then swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. It was not a room. It was a vault, a small, climate-controlled safe room. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding. I was half expecting to see gold bars, or stacks of cash, or priceless art. The room was brightly lit by a single harsh utility bulb. It contained no treasure. It was lined, floor to ceiling, with gray, metal filing cabinets and a server rack. On a simple steel table sat rows of labeled ledgers, external hard drives, and binders. "What is all this?" I asked. "This," Ms. Harding said, stepping inside and running her hand over one of the file drawers, "is the real inheritance. This is the weapon." She turned to face me. "Your grandfather was a meticulous investigator, Eliza. When he said he'd been watching Mark, it was an understatement. But he quickly realized Mark was just a symptom. Mark was a small, greedy, easily manipulated man. Arthur was not interested in the pawn. He was interested in the player. He investigated Simon Croft." She pulled open a drawer. It was packed with files. "Simon Croft, it turns out, is more than just an unethical divorce attorney. For the last 6 years, he has been running a quiet, small-scale Ponzi scheme." Harding explained. "Simon targeted moderately wealthy, insecure investors, people who wanted to feel like they were getting in on the next big thing. He used Mark as his frontman. Mark, with his charisma and his veneer of financial success, was the perfect lure. He would let slip at the golf club or over cocktails that he was in on a private fund managed by his brilliant lawyer, Croft. Mark's job was to bring in the money," Harding said, pulling out a ledger. "Simon's job was to lose it, or, more accurately, to transfer it to his own offshore accounts. And the best part, Mark was his own biggest victim." I was stunned. Mark was part of the scheme. He was the prize fish. Harding clarified. "He believed in Simon. He invested his own money, and when he didn't have any, he invested your money, the funds from your joint accounts. His gambling addiction was real, but it was amplified by his desperation. He was trying to win back the money Simon was stealing from him. Mark wasn't just in debt to casinos. He was in debt because his own lawyer was robbing him blind." The $480,000 from the house sale, it was not just to pay off bookies. It was to pay off the other angry investors in Simon's scheme, to keep the whole thing from collapsing. Arthur documented everything, Harding said, tapping a hard drive. Bank transfers, Shell Corporation documents, recorded phone calls. He found every investor Simon and Mark ever duped. Then, she paused, and her expression hardened. She walked to another cabinet, one labeled Vance E., and pulled out a single thin file. "But this," she said, "this is the part that is purely personal. This is what Simon Croft did to you." She opened the file. Inside were printed emails, internal memos from Stratus Media Group. Simon knew that as long as you were employed, as long as you had your own income and your own power, you were a threat, you were smart, you might question the post-nup, you might hire your own lawyer when Arthur died. He could not have that. He needed you neutralized. He needed you broken, desperate, and reliant on Mark before Mark made his move on the house. She handed me an email. It was from Simon Croft to David, my old boss, the golf buddy. The subject line was, "Handling that delicate matter." The email was cold, corporate, and clear. Simon was cashing in a favor. He said that Eliza Vance's position was becoming a potential conflict of interest regarding a sensitive, high-net-worth estate case he was managing. He strongly advised that Stratus Media restructure me out of the company to avoid future legal complications. He even suggested the exact date, the day before Mark's planned implosion of my life. "He had me fired," I whispered, the paper trembling in my hand. "It was a coordinated attack." "It was a conspiracy," Harding said, her voice like flint. "Mark betrayed you for money. Simon Croft orchestrated the entire demolition of your life, your job, your home, your reputation to cover his own crimes. And your grandfather. Your grandfather sat in this room and collected the receipts on every single one of them. Mark was the vulture, Eliza. But Simon Croft was the man who pointed him at the carcass. Mark's vacation in St. Bart's lasted exactly 4 days. According to the reports, Ms. Harding received from her investigators, the yoga instructor, Kelly, left him at the airport on the return flight after his platinum credit card was declined. The celebration was over. The $480,000, which he had imagined as a fresh start, had been vaporized. The Maserati down payment, the first-class tickets, the lavish gifts, and a few disastrous hands of high-stakes poker had eaten almost all of it. The rest, Ms. Harding noted, Simon Croft had already siphoned off for fees. He returned to Chicago not to a new life, but to an old nightmare. The other investors in Simon's private fund, the ones who had not been paid off by the sale of my house, were done waiting. They were not just bookies, they were dentists and surgeons and retirees, people Simon and Mark had conned, and they were beginning to compare notes. Their calls to Mark were no longer polite, they were terrified and furious. Mark, in his own panic, did the only thing he knew how to do. He called his lawyer. He called Simon, again and again, his messages growing from arrogant annoyance to high-pitched terror. But Simon had a bigger problem. Simon Croft was not worried about Mark's investors. He was worried about his own. Simon had lined up a secondary buyer for Willow Creek Manor, a major property developer he had a long-standing, corrupt relationship with. The plan had always been to sell the house twice once, from Mark to the idiot LLC for a quick, lowball sum, and a second time, from the LLC to his developer friend for a massive, secret profit. It was the perfect scam. There was only one problem. The idiot LLC would not sell. Simon had spent the last week trying to contact the representatives of Pendleton Holdings. He was finally, curtly, routed to their legal counsel. That counsel, of course, was Ms. Genevieve Harding. "Mr. Croft," I heard Ms. Harding say over a speakerphone in the New York office, her voice dripping with ice. "My client, Pendleton Holdings, has no interest in liquidating their recent acquisition. They find the property historically significant. Simon had apparently blustered, then threatened, then pleaded. The developer was getting angry. Simon's entire house of cards was wobbling because this one, anonymous buyer, refused to play their part, while Simon was distracted by the property he could not flip, and Mark was being hunted by the investors he could not pay. Ms. Harding initiated Phase 2. We were in her New York conference room, a sterile, soundproof space that felt like a command center. Before her were 24 identical sealed courier packets. "This," she said, tapping one of the packets, "is the archive. Distilled." She had not sent the entire archive to the authorities. Arthur had been specific. The authorities, she explained, were slow, and an investigation could be buried. Justice was more efficiently achieved when the victims were armed. Inside each packet was a curated selection of Arthur's evidence copies of ledgers showing Simon's fraudulent transfers, emails from Mark, using his Stratus Media account, promising guaranteed 30% returns to a fellow golf club member, and a detailed, anonymous summary of how the Ponzi scheme worked, showing exactly how their money had been stolen, not lost in the market. These packets were sent via anonymous courier to the other 12 victims of Simon's scheme. The explosion was immediate. It was not a legal filing. It was a detonation. One of the victims was a prominent Chicago surgeon with very deep pockets and a very large ego. Within 48 hours, a high-powered financial fraud law firm, retained by the surgeon, held a press conference. They were announcing a massive $20 million class action lawsuit against Simon Croft for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, and named as the primary co-conspirator, the charismatic face of the fraud, was Mark Vance. Mark was at his new condo, frantically trying to sell the Maserati online, when his face appeared on the local news. He was no longer a high-flying financier. He was a con man. "And now, Ms. Vance," Harding said, closing her laptop, "we fund their victory." The class action lawsuit, from the victim's perspective, was being financed by an anonymous benefactor who wished to see justice done. That benefactor was me. The Pendleton Fund, the $32 million Mark had no idea existed, was now paying for the army of lawyers preparing to tear him and Simon to pieces. I was using my inheritance to fund their legal destruction. Mark's collapse was instantaneous. The leasing office for his condo terminated his agreement for breach of contract, citing the fraud allegations. The dealership repossessed the Maserati, as his down payment check had ultimately bounced. The other investors, now part of the class action, filed motions to freeze all his known assets. Within a week, he was not only broke, he was toxic, a pariah with his face on the news and a dozen lawyers demanding his deposition. He was finished, but Harding had one last, elegant blade to insert. "He's facing civil charges," I said, watching a news report about the lawsuit. "He's ruined." "Not yet," Harding said. "He is only ruined. He is not yet imprisoned. We must address his final, fatal error." She made one more call. This time, it was to the United States Attorney's Office. She explained, as a concerned officer of the court, that she had reason to believe a federal crime had been committed. Mark's brilliant sale of Willow Creek Manor, the one he had bragged about in his voicemail, was not just a simple property transaction. He had sold an asset, my asset, legally to pay off some of his creditors, the immediate, violent gambling ones, while actively defrauding and concealing assets from his other creditors, the Ponzi scheme victims. "It is a crime called fraudulent conveyance," Harding explained to me, as if discussing the weather. "It is a federal offense to transfer or liquidate assets in order to hinder, delay, or defraud known creditors, and since he used interstate wire transfers to do it, well, the FBI takes that very personally. His one act of victory, the sale of my home, was the final, irrefutable proof of his criminal intent. He had not just stolen from me. He had not just conned investors. He had, in his desperation to save himself, provided the federal government with the very evidence they needed to lock him in a cage." The hunters were not just being hunted, they were already in the trap. The door slamming shut behind them. I was not legally required to attend the bankruptcy hearing. The federal case and the class action suit were machines that, once activated, ran on their own fuel. Ms. Harding had informed me that my presence was unnecessary, but I went. I told her I needed to see it. What I needed, I realized, was for him to see me. The courtroom was a sterile, fluorescent-lit box, smelling of stale coffee and anxiety. Simon Croft and Mark Vance sat at the defendant's table with their cut-rate lawyers. They looked haggard. Simon's reptilian confidence was gone, replaced by a pasty, desperate sheen of sweat. Mark just looked gray. He was a collapsed star, all his light and charisma extinguished, leaving only a dense, pathetic mass. I sat in the third row, directly behind the federal prosecutor. I had chosen my attire with the care of a general dressing for a treaty signing a dark, impeccably tailored suit, pearls, and my hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Beside me, Ms. Harding sat with her leather briefcase, a silent statue of competence. For the first 20 minutes, Mark stared at the table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a ghost, a shell. Then, during a lull in the procedural jargon, his lawyer leaned in to whisper something. Mark looked up, his eyes empty, and began to scan the gallery. He was looking for someone, anyone, a friend, an ally. He found no one. His gaze passed over me, stopped, and then snapped back, his mind struggling to process what it was seeing. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply met his gaze. I held it. I let him look. I let him see the woman he had tried to erase, the woman who was not in a motel room, not begging for scraps, not working at a coffee shop. The woman who sat in a $1,000 suit, radiating a calm, cold power he had never known she possessed. I watched the recognition flicker in his eyes. He looked at me, then at Ms. Harding, whose reputation in high-stakes legal circles was notorious. He looked back at me. His gaze darted around the courtroom, at the phalanx of lawyers from the class action suit, at the grim-faced federal agents. I could see the gears turning, the frantic, terrified calculations, the anonymous LLC, the buyer who would not sell, the bottomless pit of money that was funding his destruction, the voice on the phone with Simon, the sudden, perfectly executed legal assault from all sides. He realized it was not the government that had cornered him. It was not his investors. It was me. It was not a gasp. It was a small, choked sound, as if someone had punched him in the stomach. The blood drained from his face, leaving a mottled, yellowish white. The arrogant predator I had married, the man who had laughed at me in that final voicemail, simply shattered. The mask of confidence did not just crack, it disintegrated, revealing the terrified, hollow creature beneath. He turned back to his lawyer, his entire body trembling. He had not just been outmaneuvered. He had been annihilated by a ghost. I stood up and walked out. I did not need to see the rest. Ms. Harding called me 3 weeks later with the final summary. The evidence Arthur had collected was a prosecutor's dream. It was an airtight case, documented and cross-referenced. Simon Croft, facing overwhelming proof of conspiracy and wire fraud, was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Mark, designated as a primary co-conspirator and client lure, took a plea deal to avoid the main fraud trial. He was sentenced to 4 years in a minimum security facility for conspiracy and federal fraudulent conveyance. His financial ruin was absolute. He was ordered to pay restitution he could never afford. His assets were gone, and his name was toxic. He was nothing. On the day of his sentencing, I was not in Chicago. I was at Willow Creek Manor. The transformation had begun. The overgrown weeds were gone, the peeling paint stripped away. Sunlight, for the first time in decades, streamed through the tall, immaculate library windows. The house was breathing again. It was becoming a home. I sat at Arthur's massive mahogany desk, a laptop open in front of me. I was not watching the news. I was watching a live-streamed bankruptcy auction. The seized personal assets of Mark Vance. It was a pathetic parade of the life he had tried to build. Gaudy designer suits, overpriced golf clubs, tacky modern art from his leased condo. I ignored it all. I was waiting for one item. Lot 74. It appeared on the screen. A gentleman's Patek Philippe wristwatch, rose gold. Note engraving on back. I had bought it for him as a wedding gift, with my bonus from Stratus Media. I had saved for a year. The engraving had read, "Our time is now." The bidding was slow. A few pawn shops, some online watch dealers. The price climbed to a few $1,000s. I waited. In the final 10 seconds of the auction, I entered my bid. A single, absurdly high number. The timer hit 0. Sold. The watch arrived a week later in an insured box. I opened it. It was heavy and cold. I did not wind it. I did not put it on. I walked over to the grand fireplace in the library, the one Arthur had sat in front of while he planned his beautiful, patient revenge. I placed the watch on the center of the mantelpiece, directly beneath his portrait. It was not a timepiece. It was a trophy. It was a cold, silent reminder, sitting in the heart of the house he tried to steal, that he had not just lost his money or his freedom. He had lost the game, to the one person he had been arrogant enough to never truly see. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are listening from, so please comment below and let's share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.